On this Tuesday night, 'twas the fight before Christmas. Booming demand for boosters and COVID-19 tests as Omicron overwhelms.
It's so contagious that everyone's going to be exposed in a matter of weeks.
Breaking news from BC as the province beefs up its pandemic protocols. Holiday travel trouble. The new rules and advice for visitors in some provinces.
This variant does not care if we are weary.
From Omicron testing times to treatment options, doctors answer more of your COVID-19 questions. And oh, Christmas tree, the holiday staple suddenly in short supply.
We're going to see the effects of this for years to come.
We'll get to the root of the problem.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin again tonight with the rapid rise in COVID-19 cases and restrictions in Canada, driven by that highly transmissible variant Omicron. And it was another record-breaking day. Take a look. Here are the numbers so far.
You're watching Global Toronto. This is Global News Morning.
Good morning and thank you for joining us on this Monday, July 13th. I'm Jeff Semple. Anthony is away this week. And today we are expecting to learn more about what life will look like here in Ontario when the province moves to stage 3 of reopening. Miranda Anthesel will have more on what we know about this plan, including what it means for businesses and gathering in large groups. But first, Miranda, you are live at Flemington Community Centre this morning, where it's like Christmas morning there, I imagine. Kids in Toronto heading back to camp for the first time this summer. How's it going out there? We've heard growing calls from health officials in recent days for people to upgrade their masks to protect against Omicron. But what exactly makes the mask the right fit? To answer that question and others we've received from our viewers over the past few days, we are joined now by infectious diseases physician Dr. Isaac Bogosh and epidemiologist Patrick Saunders-Hastings. Doctors, thank you both so much for joining us to tackle some of these questions. So Isaac Bogosh, first over to you. For those of us who put masks on our Christmas list this year, Fred wants to know, is mask quality more important with Omicron, and what's acceptable, and when should a mask be discarded or washed? What do you think?
Yeah, a couple of points here. A higher quality mask certainly is more important, especially with Omicron.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this live Global News special as the world remembers a prince. I'm Jeff Semple. It has been just over 1 week since the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, passed away peacefully at the age of 99, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. And over the last 8 days, tributes have been pouring in from right around the world. Mourners gathering at Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, and also here in Canada. Now, Prince Philip was unsentimental. He didn't want to make a fuss, and he certainly didn't want to talk about legacy. But his is truly extraordinary.
Our Europe Bureau Chief Jeff Semple has a front row seat in Moscow. Jeff?
Well, Donna, take a look at this impressive fireworks display lighting up the sky over Red Square and marking the end of Victory Day. A deafening display of patriotism and power. This is one of the final front lines against the so-called Islamic State here in Iraq, with ISIS positions just a couple of kilometers from here. And the battle for Hawija has just gotten underway. The Taliban allowed us to monitor one of their patrols here on the streets of Kabul as the extremist group tries to project a friendlier face to the outside world. At the same time, it's also seeking international recognition and desperately needed foreign aid. And if you walk the halls of the ICU, you can see up close the changing face of this pandemic. We were here in the first and second waves, where you largely saw elderly patients sitting in these rooms, but these days there are a lot more people who are younger. Well, we are witnessing a very tense, very improvised exercise in crowd control. As you can see, Austrian authorities are allowing thousands of refugees up these steps one at a time, where they can board these trains bound for Munich. And here she comes. The 90-year-old can be forgiven for not walking the entire stretch. She's opted instead to go for a drive, as you can see, greeting thousands of royal watchers who have lined the street here for kilometers, even at 90, keeping calm and carrying on. The Allied navies wanted to approach the beach at low tide to avoid running into these thousands of traps set by the Germans meant to sink the ships. But the lower tide also meant that the Canadian soldiers had to get out of their boats sooner and make a run for it. They were completely exposed, in some places for hundreds of meters, before they even reached the beach. And some of them never did. Kabul is covered in black and white. Taliban flags, checkpoints, and patrols, keeping a close eye on their newly conquered capital. So Ghaffar and his family have to hide. We're not showing his face because for 5 years he worked as a driver for the Canadian Armed Forces, fighting the same militants who now control his country. When the Taliban came last summer, we fled our home in Kandahar, he says. If they catch me, they will do bad things to me. They and 7 other families are holed up in this secret safe house, organized by Canadian veterans and funded through private donations. Food and medical supplies are brought in, so the families don't need to go out. But a few weeks ago, Ghafar's 13-year-old son became restless. He snuck out for some ice cream and was stopped by the Taliban. The Taliban asked me where my family was. I lied and said they'd left the country, he says. They told me to get into their car. The Taliban drove him north to the front lines and put him to work in the kitchen. After 18 days of frantic searching, the family finally found him and negotiated his release. Fortunately, the Taliban didn't know Ghaffar had worked for the Canadians. It was the most painful 18 days, he says. I couldn't eat or sleep. I thank God my son is okay. Ghaffar is one of 2,000 Afghans and their families who supported Canada's military mission and who are now hiding in safe houses across Kabul. The former interpreters, drivers, and cooks show us photos from their time with the Canadian forces. They've applied to move to Canada as refugees. Some have waited months for a response, while others, like Ghafar's family, have just been approved. His youngest is already eager to practice his English. Canada. But even those with Canadian visas are stuck. With few flights leaving the country, a Canadian NGO, the Veterans Transition Network, has been slowly driving refugees out. A treacherous 5-hour trek through the mountains, forced to anxiously cross more than a dozen Taliban checkpoints, which we're advised not to film. Before finally arriving at Pakistan's chaotic land border. In 2 months, the Veterans Group has evacuated around 200 Canadian refugees this way. 2,000 more remain in Kabul, and time is running out. These families just received an email from the Canadian NGO that manages these safe houses, informing them that due to dwindling financial resources, on November 5th, some of these safe houses will have to close, and some of these families will be forced out.
It's going to be a big problem for us because I have nothing to support myself.
Mohammed Omar is a former Canadian Forces interpreter. For 3 months, he's hid in this safe house, along with 50 other families. Last summer, Umar, his wife, and 4 children left everything behind in Kandahar, told to travel to Kabul, where Canada planned to send a rescue flight before the Taliban took control. He says there's no going back.
Right now, the situation in Kandahar is day by day getting worse and worse. Taliban visited each and every individual home.
This Taliban police commander told Global News that Afghans who supported Canada's military have nothing to fear. People are just pretending they're afraid to convince other countries like Canada to accept them, he says. They are safe here. They should not be afraid. Reassuring words, but their actions speak loudest. For 4 years, Darkhani worked security at the Canadian Forces base in Kandahar. 6 months ago, her 23-year-old son was killed by a Taliban bomb attack. And just last week, another son was kidnapped and beaten until he gave them her phone number. She plays us their threatening messages, warning she can't hide. They will find her. The Taliban hates that I worked with the Canadians as a female police officer, she says. When the Taliban says they're peaceful and don't threaten anybody, they're lying. The opposite is true. The veterans group say they've been told the Canadian government has no plans to fund the safe houses. And if nothing changes, some of those who help to support Canada's military mission in this country will be left to fend for themselves on the streets of Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Donna?
All right, Jeff Semple in Kabul tonight. Thank you.